Today we have a crazy entitled parent story of a grandma immediately trying to claim property after someone's dad passed. We'll get into that in a bit, but first, mom got arrested. A couple of weeks ago, I wrote a post because my mom was harassing my sister Pam. This was because my sister finally cut off my mom and refused to give her money. So, quick TLDR is my mom told Pam a gigantic and stupid, easily debunked lie to guilt Pam into sending her money. The lie caused a bit of drama with me and my sister, but we worked it out because, again, it was a very stupid lie. After the truth came out, Pam finally went no contact with mom, just like I had done a while ago. Mom started harassing Pam, and even after Pam had blocked her number, mom would find ways to contact her. She even showed up at the house Pam shares with her roommates. The police were absolutely useless and told Pam and then myself that there was nothing they could do until mom threatened violence or became violent. The officer I talked to on the phone actually laughed when I mentioned getting a TRO. It was just a freaking nightmare. So I took some advice from here and got Pam to change her number, and things kind of quieted down. That's when mom started leaving letters in Pam's mailbox, just drunken ramblings, and so we called the police again, specifically after the third one. The officer they sent out was incredibly rude and told my sister, and I freaking quote, "If I had a daughter like you, I'd also be driven to drink." Before anyone asks, yes, we put in a complaint. No, nothing happened. After that, my husband and I sat down, worked out some bills, and contacted a lawyer. We don't know any personally, but I did have a coworker who got divorced last year, so I asked him for the number to the family law practice he hired. $150-ish later, I was able to send mom an official quit your crap letter. And for the past 3 days, everything has been blissfully quiet. Then earlier tonight, which I guess technically is this morning, Sarah, my sister's best friend, called because Pam was too shaken up to talk. The police were at Sarah's house and my mom had been arrested. My husband and I hurried over, and by the time we got there, the police had already left with mom. Pam was still crying and having a panic attack. Sarah and Heather were trying to calm her down. I'm just so freaking angry thinking about it. The last time I saw Pam crying like that was when she had found out she was failing biology in 9th grade. She's a perfectionist, you know? I love her to death, but she's so scared of failing. I had come over and she was just sobbing over a stack of papers and miserable, and I don't know. I told myself she would never cry again like that, but she did, and it was because of our mom, and I didn't stop it. Because Pam was too upset to talk, Sarah told us that they'd been getting ready to go out for a late movie when my mom showed up. At first, Pam told her to just go home. Then my mom started screaming at her and Pam sort of froze, and that's when Heather got involved and told my mom that she was going to call the police if she didn't leave. That seemed to work at first, and from what Sarah said, mom kind of just wandered off down the street. Pam was shaken up, but it seemed to be over. Then they heard a loud crunching sort of noise from outside, and they looked and mom had driven over the neighbor's mailbox, which, to be honest, I didn't notice when I pulled up, but it was flattened. Heather immediately called the police, but I guess so had the neighbors. Then Sarah called us, the police came, mom refused to do a sobriety test, and they hauled her off. The worst part is, I'm not entirely sure they would have actually arrested her if the neighbors hadn't called too. It's kind of a quiet neighborhood and the people directly next door seem to be in their 50s or so. Sarah said the husband came out to put in the complaint about the mailbox, and the police talked to them more than they talked to Pam, who was actually getting harassed. Because Pam was so shaken up, we brought her home with us. She thankfully passed out almost immediately, and then my husband fell asleep, but I can't sleep. I'm so angry. Mom could have hurt someone, and the police have done absolutely nothing up to this point. I'm sure we'll have more options now that she's been arrested. Maybe we can even get a restraining order, but if they had just listened to me weeks ago when mom first started harassing Pam, none of this might have happened tonight. Freak her. Edited to add, because I forgot to mention, I live about an hour away from my sister. When Sarah called, I'd fallen asleep on the couch while my husband Ryan was playing video games, so by the time I got up, got dressed, and drove over, nearly 2 hours had passed. I think what's important here is things do seem to be progressing. The glaringly obvious and unfortunate thing is depending on where you are and how the police are where you live, you unfortunately can't rely on them to be the solution for you. Even if that means you have to go above them to go to even more legal extremes, like straight up trying to help them out and getting like a restraining order. At that point, the police would probably be a little bit more willing to do something. Cartabella commented, "You're taking steps. Time to get doorbell and security cameras that record at both your houses. Mom is going to be let out and she'll be in hot water for the DUI, and if you see her on the camera behaving recklessly, you can report her for suspected drunk driving or, hopefully if the courts are more used than the police, on a suspended license. You have legal support and each other. She will go through an extinction burst, but looks like she'll put the nails in her own coffin in the process and get herself locked up for one transgression or another. This too shall pass. Also, hi, I'm Steven, and if you guys enjoy crazy stories of entitled parents, why not hit those like and subscribe buttons down below? That said, our next story is, Mom tells me she knows I am lying. When I was around 9, my mom ran a youth group for young girls. One of the lessons was on keeping a clear conscience, so not lying, which I agree with. I'm not sure how and I'm not sure at what point, but somewhere along the lines, it turned into every night was basically a confessional with her. I would tell her every single thought that went through my head, good or bad, and I felt extremely guilty when I wouldn't tell her something, even if it wasn't bad at all. I was told those were lies of omission. This wasn't all bad, as one time I was lying about cheating on math and I came clean and told her, but that was legit the only benefit. To really paint the picture, one day I was like 11 and a song came into my head with the curse word bench in it. I never said it. I thought it. Once. I spent hours thinking how my mom would be so disappointed in me, but that she would be even more disappointed if I didn't tell her. And I realized I'd feel more guilty not saying anything to her than I would about the actual thought coming into my head. So I did tell her, and I sobbed for hours. I had no privacy, every thought I had was hers, and anything I didn't tell her, I lost sleep over, even if it wasn't bad. Over time, I told myself I had to stop sharing. This was too much, she knew so much about me. And so every night, I shared with her less and less to the point where it stopped and she stopped staying in my room and interrogating me. I would just always act like I was too tired to talk. Problem was, she was still bringing up how, you used to have such a clear conscience with me, you would tell me anything, as a guilt trip. I've never fed in, but I am a bad liar, so if she asks me something, I will tell her. Fast forward, I'm 16 and in my first relationship, and me and my boyfriend were, let's just say, touching. Right before we actually did anything, she was listening outside the door and after I don't know how many minutes, poked her head in and asked what we were doing as if she didn't already know. We hadn't done anything yet, so I told her we didn't do anything. She left, I made sure, and we proceeded. I felt so guilty because I knew she was gonna ask and I couldn't lie to her. The next day she did and I gave in. She then started asking me insane questions like, did it feel good? What exactly did he do? Did you get him off? How many times? Were all your clothes off? How did you act? Was he circumcised? Basically everything you wouldn't want your mom knowing about you, she asked. And now knew because I can't lie and told her. This was during an 8-hour-long car ride with only her, wasn't getting out of it and she took huge advantage of that. The fact that she knows all about that grosses me out every day. I hate that she has that much personal info about me. I hate that that picture is in her head. When I got back into this relationship at 18, we were doing sexual stuff, but I realized that I'm an adult now and I'm not obligated to tell her anything. I cannot explain to you how freeing this was. I finally had something to myself. Keep in mind, she would still ask these pervy questions even at 18. But I would change the subject and she doesn't know what we did. I don't lie about much because, like I said, I can't. However, that is one lie I am keeping from her. In addition, I run an advocacy group online for survivors of CSA, as I am one, and my whole story is online with over 300,000 views. I was never allowed to have my face online growing up, both for safety but also anyone online is looking for attention. My online presence about my abuse is something I want neither of my parents knowing about. I don't want them thinking the abuse was their fault, cause it wasn't, but also I would just like to be an adult and be away from them as much as possible. Problem is, I'm getting asked to go on podcasts and stuff and I'm having to turn everything down. I can't do Zoom calls because my mom, 1, asks who I'm talking to, and 2, listens through the walls. Can't leave the house to record anything because I'm always asked where I'm going, so I don't ever leave and I have no life because of this. Last time I left the house by myself on my own accord was one time last summer. Otherwise, I'm forced to go with my parents everywhere to everything, and I go nowhere on my own. Okay, so those are legit the two things I'm hiding. That's it. Anyways, last weekend, my mom sat me down and told me that our relationship is terrible. You never share anything with me anymore like you used to, and God or something is telling me you're lying about something, and you need to tell me because lying is wrong. Me and my mom come from a line of psychics. Edit, I knew y'all were gonna have problems with this one. If you don't believe me, please keep it to yourself. I'm dealing with enough right now. Last thing I need is people calling me bogus. Have enough of that in my home life. Y'all can believe that or not. I've known stuff I shouldn't have and had no way of knowing, so unfortunately I believe her. Anyways, I lied to her again and told her that I'm not hiding anything, just trying to get out of this convo, and she goes, if that's true, let me see your phone. I told her absolutely not. I wanted to pay for this phone, but you and dad wouldn't let me. Insanely unacceptable to ask me that at 19 years old. I tried to pay for the phone last year, and they were not budging, and I knew it was so they could pull this, it's our phone anyways. Going and paying for my own after they got one for me would have caused the biggest scene. Anyways, now she 100% thinks I'm hiding something because I wouldn't give her my phone, which my advocacy group runs from, and now I feel like the biggest liar ever. I know lying is wrong, and I wouldn't be doing this if it wasn't for her actions before. I thought me laying a boundary down would make me feel better, but it made me feel worse and fixed nothing. I feel like I'm 9 years old again with absolutely zero privacy to my life. I just want her to leave me alone. I've never had a life outside of her before. I can't move out yet, but once I do, they still have Life 360 on me, which they put on my phone without my consent at 18, and I still won't have a life because they'll know where I am at all times. I feel so trapped. I just want to be done. Thanks for reading. I try to put myself in OP situation and think about how I would be if I grew up in that, and I just can't imagine myself thriving at all in a situation like that. I feel like by the time I was 18 years old, I'd be kind of like a broken person. OP with their advocacy group and stuff is awesome. I don't know if I'd have been able to get that far. Continuing to fight and claw towards more independency clearly is the goal here. Damage Puzzle-Headed 41 commented, I'm so sorry to hear that this is happening. I can understand feeling trapped by the guilt of hiding things from my mother. Unfortunately, your mother's parenting style is not normal, nor is it healthy for your relationship. Your mother has taken advantage of your open honesty and now expects you to divulge incredibly invasive things. You need to establish some serious boundaries with her and/or start saving your money to get out of your parents' house. In my experience, the overwhelming involvement in your private life will only get worse until you're able to physically take space from her. OP responded saying, thank you. I'm saving up money to buy a house right now as I'm not renting. I'm very close. Been saving since I was 9 and have a good stay-at-home job. I know it'll only get worse. Been trying to gray rock, but it's hard when we live in the same house, and she's 20 steps away from my room and will ask me anything that comes to mind. This next story is asked to sign papers to be disowned. I want to start by thanking everyone who's provided guidance and support. I don't know if I would have stayed strong without your help. About a week and a half ago, my uncle, who's a revert, which is relevant for later, reached out to me so we could talk. He's honestly the best uncle I have and have asked him for guidance on several occasions before. I expressed my feeling and how I felt about the entire situation and told him I tried to get my parents to understand why I left and they would just not accept the situation. He told me that I still have time to not lose my parents and siblings and to try to not lose contact despite the situation. I don't really agree with those thoughts. I'm at a point where they threaten to cut contact and disown me so many times that I just don't care anymore. I'm 27 years old and still being treated like a 17-year-old? My family, especially my parents, are exhausting human beings. I told them about a guy I was dating and that we'd gone on a few dates, but in order for things to go further, things would have to be done the halal way. But my parents didn't take it well and they used every single excuse to make me feel bad about the fact that I lied to them, and I told him that I did because I would ask for permission being an adult and he wouldn't let me. His excuse was that it was because he's a very nervous guy. Oh, and that how dare I date this guy, and that going out on dates with him is haram. Well, he contacted the guy so they could talk and told them that they would never want to meet his parents and that he was destroying his family. My guy responded with, that's not what I want. And my dad told him the solution was him leaving me. He then texted him a bunch, blaming him for the situation basically. I honestly can't stand my dad. He's a very chauvinistic guy. The type that thinks the only thing that truly makes a woman happy is marriage and having kids. Yesterday, we met up after a while, and I said there was no way in heck that I would move back in with them, and their only argument was, well, if you don't want to move back in with us, it's because you're sinning. Sick, I know. Then they said if I wanted to work with them, and I said sure, because I believe that the company has potential, but what my dad said made me sick to my stomach. He said the only way they would allow me to live alone and stay in contact with them was that I swore to behave, which meant not going to parties or drinking, which I don't do anyways, but to not go out with guy friends or date any guy. I may be too open-minded, but how are you supposed to meet someone and get married then? I live in a non-Muslim country, and the Muslim guys I know are all a piece of crap. I am no one to judge, but the atrocities that they have done? I don't know if I want that for my life or one of them to be the father of my children. My uncle had mentioned that my dad had resorted to me wanting to sign papers to disown me unless I gave them something, which is why he came to talk to me. My mom had no idea because I asked her and she seemed confused. But yesterday when we met and she mentioned it, my dad said wait and asked me what I was willing to do before continuing, so he did have the papers, he just hadn't told my mom. Everyone in my community knows I left, but he also mentioned that if I was to start working with them, then I would be working with family, and that driving back and forth, because I don't live in the same town, would be suspicious. Because why would I drive to where I live if my parents' house is right there? So we would say that I'm taking a course or classes so that they wouldn't know I'm in fact living alone. All of it has left a bad taste in my mouth, and I don't even want to stay in contact with any of them. It obviously hurts, but I'm feeling disgusted by the behavior, and it's something that I don't want to participate in. I definitely feel where OP's coming from. I completely understand them, and I'm with them. I think the very last words of OP's own post are kind of the advice that they need to take. These people clearly don't have your best interests as far as what you want for your life. If you want to be around people that are going to continue trying to pull back your freedoms, continue trying to pressure you to give yourself up to their ideals and what they want you to do, then stick around by all means, but they don't really sound like the most flexible or open-minded of people. Jealous Garden 9809 commented, "Yeah, a rule of thumb is never mix family and business, but with all the extra requirements to work at your family's company, is it really worth it? It would be an HR nightmare, not to mention a nightmare to try and leave. They could seriously freak up your life even more and are already starting to encroach on boundaries by being prepared to lie and say you're in college. Soon it'll be, why do you spend so much money on your own? You should just move in." Not to mention, I have a feeling that there is a strong chance your father may want to set you up with some employee at his company as well. Please, for your own sake, you need to drop them, OP. Working for the company and any money you make will be at the expense of being back in these people's circus, and it'll likely cost everything you have now, if not more, to pull out when you have the courage to, because of all the control they'll have over you if you work for them. This next story is, my grandma wants to take our apartment after my dad's passing. Even before I was born, my entitled grandmother has hated my mom. My parents often told me that how they were almost homeless when I was born. When my dad brought her to his apartment, my grandma immediately wanted her gone, but my dad fought with her and, in the end, went to live with my mom's side of the family. When I was born, my grandma didn't know for 3 days until she somehow found out, so she begged my dad to come back with her grandson. But he only accepted on the condition she leaves and lets my mom live in the apartment. My grandma very aggressively agreed, and her and my grandpa bought a house in the suburbs close by. Now, on to the things I remember. When I was growing up, she would usually say some mean remarks towards my mom's side of the family, like critique their driving, apartment, and my aunt's kid. I always thought it was rude or mean, but I was a kid then. She stopped when I was around 10. When I was 8, my grandpa unfortunately passed away in his sleep. He was sweet and kind and put up with my grandma's BS about my mom's side of the family, but ever since then, she's gotten more and more lonely. I understand she is lonely and wants company, but what she does is, in my opinion, inexcusable. She started calling us daily, asking if me and my dad could come and help her with renovation and work in the garden. My dad knew she was lonely, and even though he didn't like spending time with her, he decided to go and drink beer and smoke with her and whatever else they were doing because she was his mother, but sometimes he would get into fights with her and come back complaining. I was never informed what those arguments were about, but sometimes when I was with him working, I would hear my mom's name mentioned and how she was manipulating my dad. He would argue with her, they would cut contact for 3 days, and then he goes to work on the house again, and the circle would repeat until December last year. My dad had breathing problems and we brought him to the hospital where the doctor said they had to do a surgery to replace an organ. That's not important. What is important is that when he was home preparing for the surgery in January, we took care of him. My mom went to work and I went to school, but after that, we didn't leave his side. My grandma, on the other hand, came and said she would be staying with us until he's fine and promised to take care of him. But when he started having difficulty breathing or felt pain, she would just panic, go to the kitchen window and start smoking because it was her way of staying calm, and we need to stay calm in such situations. Unfortunately, my dad passed away mid-surgery, and me and my mom couldn't say goodbye. But my grandma immediately took this as an opportunity to take the apartment back for her. 3 months after his passing, she started to come over almost daily and ask my mom where she was. Why was she going to her friend's house? Why doesn't she visit my dad's grave weekly, and does she even care? This started a circle of her and my mom having arguments every week, with them always ending with non-stop whining. My grandma also started to insult my mom's side of the family more. Says stuff like how my grandpa was terrible at driving and how she's driven twice as long as him. He's older than her, by the way. And how my aunt probably doesn't know how to parent her kid. She started picking me up from school since I go to a school that's on the other side of my city. I don't have a problem walking, but she begged me to let her pick me up, as well as beginning me to call her daily and come over to her house on weekends. I did that as I felt very bad for her since she was my grandma, but one day I forgot to call her, and on the next day when she was picking me up from school, her eyes were almost crying, and she told me how forgotten she felt and how I was insulted by forgetting about her. I apologized, and we didn't speak for 2 days until she picked me up to help her in the garden. She started calling me by my dad's name, and I told her I wasn't him. She said she just saw me as him, and now that I'm the man of the house, I'm taking his place. I told her that yes, I am doing everything to help, but I'm not him and I don't want to be called that. She just nodded her head and didn't mention it again. More arguing between my mom and grandma happened on a weekly basis, and my grandma started getting frustrated. My mom said she saw my grandma poking around the house when she was coming back from work, but my grandma was acting innocent. So my mom bought a camera and placed it in our living room, but we didn't see anything. A month and a half ago, I noticed that when I went to help my grandma during the weekends, she would use it as an excuse to talk badly about my mom and her family. Instead of cutting grass or finishing projects my dad left, she would just ask me to do small things and say, "Let's take a 20-minute break since you're already tired." And during those breaks, she would say stuff like how my mom is lying to me, or my grandpa and grandma from my mom's side never bought me anything or picked me up from school. So I slowly started to get annoyed when she would call to pick me up, and I tried politely declining and telling her I don't want to come. But she would just say, "Oh, but Saturday is the only day with good weather. I'll just pick you up then." And before I respond, she hung up. A while ago, my mom and my grandma from her side visited my dad's grave, and my grandma was there and started yelling at them about how they didn't visit and how she didn't care. My grandpa was very shocked, but wasn't really surprised since he knew her before I was born. And 2 weeks ago, we went to fuel up my dad's car, which we left with her to keep safe until I can learn how to drive. She made a promise to only drive it a few times just so it doesn't break or anything. I don't know, I'm not a car person. We filled the car up and left her. But right the next day, my uncle needed it since it was bigger than his car and he needed to carry a lot of things, and he noticed the fuel tank was half empty. My mom got worried where she was taking the car without us knowing, but tried ignoring it. Eventually, I started to talk back to her and ask her why she thinks those things about my mother and her family. And she told me, "Oh, I'm just telling you what you can see." I started getting annoyed, and over the weeks, I talked back to her more and more until I told her that I knew she tried to kick my parents out before I was born, and she started trying to cry but couldn't get the tears out and praying on the spot saying, "Oh, OP's dad's name, I failed you, I'm sorry." And then immediately changed her attitude to say that what I heard isn't true. that she isn't a villain and that she just wanted peace. She then took me to my dad's grave and started kissing it and praying to him so I could believe her. But after that, the opposite happened. I stopped believing her completely, started trying to ignore her, but it was impossible. She came over unannounced almost daily and asked us if we would be there if she got sick and too old. We didn't give her a straight answer. Last week, me, my mom, aunt, uncle, and their kid went on a vacation to a mountain for summer, and we locked the doors to the living room, which is also my mom's room, and my room. They have a different lock, so my grandma could only access the hallway, kitchen, and bathroom. But we didn't tell my grandma we were going on vacation. On the second day of our vacation, she called telling us she would come over to visit. We told her we weren't home and we were going for a walk, and she asked us why we locked the living room and the bedroom. We told her we were on a vacation but lied where we were, and she got angry, telling us we'll have a talk once we return and that she is the only one in the family who wants peace. We then spent the entire vacation worried and not being able to sleep. My mom even cried a few times about how she doesn't feel safe in her home. I got angry and just waited until we got home. I do have to mention that my grandma legally owns a huge portion of the house, and my mom only has 1/3, and I'm still not a legal adult, but all the furniture is ours. My mom and dad renovated the entire place after taking it from my grandma and grandpa, so she can only own walls, or so I was told. A few hours ago, when my mom was preparing food, my grandma came with a serious expression and said, "That's it, I'm moving in, I will live here now. It's absurd that you lock someone out of their own home." I told her we didn't trust her and that in order for us to finally be at peace, she needs to give us her keys to the house and not interact again. But she said we were crazy for thinking we could kick her out of her house. But then I saw that my parents were right about that story. She told me to stay and she would take care of me, and my mom can go back to her parents' house. I told her that if she leaves, I'm leaving with her, and she said, "Fine, as long as you call me and help me out." I told her that ship has sailed and that I don't want to see her again, and she looked at me and said she was incredibly disappointed and my dad would be as well. So I reminded her of how my dad did the same almost 18 years ago before I was born, and she almost started crying. After a while of us going back and forth, arguing about everything I already listed, she went to the living room and took her legal documents that said she owned the house. After more arguing, she took a cigarette, and before lighting it, I took it from her hand because I was annoyed of her constant smoking and I was already going crazy. Once I touched the cigarette, she bit my hand like an animal and told me not to touch her stuff. After more arguing, she left with the documents. My mom immediately started looking for cheap apartments in our city. She said my grandma is going to take those documents to make sure she can legally kick my mom out. Obviously, she doesn't want to kick me out because she said I was her blood and I was my dad, but I told her plenty of times that if my mom goes, I will leave with her. I started writing this a while ago and have changed it a bunch of times. I don't know what to do, and it seems the only way for us to be safe is if we live somewhere she doesn't know about. I'll be turning 18 in a year and a half, which is when I'll have a say in the house, but me and my mom can't wait that long. If we buy an appointment, we have to take a loan, which my mom says isn't that big of a deal. We have enough money, but I still don't want to leave this house. I don't know what to do. If you have any advice, that would be great, but even if not, again, thank you for taking the time to read this. So I think it really comes down to the actual ownership of the house. If she owns 1/3 of the house, I completely understand not wanting to leave the house. I mean, it's where your comfort is, it's everything you've known, but realistically, there's nothing you can do when this is getting very contentious, and there's a real risk that you might get kicked out. It's honestly for the best to pivot and just find someplace that is your own, under your control, and you can't be manipulated in any way. Lisa Knows Best commented, "If your mother owns 1/3 and you have 1/3 you'll get when you come of age, the grandmother only owns 1/3. You and your mother own the majority. Have your mom talk to a lawyer and maybe you can force the sale of the house when you're 18. Just take the money and never look back. You two definitely need legal counsel though. Good luck." My boy Tice added, "Agree, you were in a position of power here. Get a lawyer involved and drag it out until you're 18, and then make the choices that you and your mother want." But with that being said, that's all the time we have for today. Now, if you want to hear another absolutely crazy entitled parent story, check out that video on the left. Or if you missed my latest video, check out that video on the right. That said, I'll see you all next time with some more stories.